Welcome to the CPI 260 Configural Report Introduction. This brief presentation introduces you to the newest addition to the CPI 260 suite of reports. We currently have the Client Feedback Report as well as the Coaching Report for Leaders. And now this new report, the CPI 260 Configural Report, is the third report in our family of CPI reports. One of the definitions of the word configure is to bring together. The Configural Report brings together or combines multiple CPI scales in order to offer CPI 260 interpretations for your clients. The configural interpretations in this report go beyond just specific evaluations of individual CPI 260 scales. Configural analysis takes into account how several CPI 260 scales work together in order to offer more nuanced interpretations of your client's results. So we're very excited to introduce this new configural report, allowing you to spot subtle trends and patterns in the CPI 260 scale results, getting you closer to the art of CPI interpretation. In the next few minutes, we want to refresh your memory of the key purposes of the CPI assessment and link this new CPI 260 configural report to those important and useful purposes. In this presentation, we will quickly walk you through the 6 sections of the new CPI 260 configural report, showing pages and, where we can, linking the sections of the configural report to information you may already be familiar with in the existing client feedback report. As the final point on this slide indicates, the CPI 260 configural report contains 2 all-new sources of interpretive information for a set of CPI 260 results that are not found in any other of the CPI 260 reports. We will look at these 2 new to the assessment sections of the configural report in some depth. As you know, the CPI 260 is a 260-item empirically derived personality instrument. Its main purpose is to describe you as if you were being described by a group of knowledgeable and objective others. The descriptions it offers are about ways of dealing with others, that is, interpersonal style and ways of relating to people. In addition, CPI 260 descriptions are also about personal values, such as orientation toward rules and structure, as well as to achievement drive and notions such as personal flexibility, creativity, and sensitivity. Besides being descriptive, the CPI 260 assessment is also comparative. That is, the enormous amount of normative and non-test data associated with the instrument allows you to compare your client's results to the results of thousands of others who have taken the assessment. In effect, as the interpreter, this enables you to be able to say to your client that you appear to have responded to the CPI items in ways that are similar to people who are described like this. This descriptive and comparative information can be blended in with other information that you're collecting for your client in regards to their likely strengths and style, as well as their possible limitations or blind spots. These 2 clear and original CPI purposes drive the structure and content of the CPI 260 configural report. The CPI 260 configural report is intended to provide additional insight, information for the interpreter rather than for the end-user client. It is not just another report that provides more text for the CPI 260 respondent. If you want formal CPI 260 reports for your client, provide them with the user-friendly client feedback report or are accompanied with the coaching report for leaders, both of which present information in a coach's voice. Then for you, the interpreter, run a configural report. It will enhance and support the more basic information contained in both the client feedback report as well as the coaching report for leaders. The CPI 260 configural report is a high-level report in that it links you back to the rigorous conceptual and interpretive foundations of the original CPI while sticking to the executive length CPI 260 versions of the scales. Interpretive descriptions are data-based and general in nature, allowing broad applications of the CPI 260 assessment beyond just business organizational settings. In addition to organizational applications, the CPI 260 Configural Report can also be used for individual consultation, counseling, and personal training. The CPI 260 Configural Report introduces two new, very important sources of interpretive data. Part 5 of the report offers a series of client descriptions based upon an examination of 80 possible configurations or combinations of multiple CPI 260 scales. Part 6 of the report presents even more information, an individualized Q-sort description based on the specific CPI 260 results. Together, these two sections will help you ensure that your interpretive comments are complete and that they embrace both the art and the science of the CPI interpretation. The first four parts of the CPI 260 Configural Report will be familiar to CPI 260 users, as information of this sort is provided in the existing client feedback report. These four parts provide the basic information that you need to begin conducting a CPI 260 interpretation. Parts 5 and 6 are all new for the CPI 260 assessment, and they bring fine-grained detail to your interpretive process. Let's quickly walk through the 6 parts of the CPI 260 Configural Report. As a CPI user, you are likely aware of the first step in the interpretive process, examination of the CPI report to determine if the results are generally accurate and directly usable. The Configural Report scoring system first checks the number of unanswered items. It will establish that the omit threshold of 18 has not been exceeded. The system then checks for response sets determined to be overly self-favorable, that is, the common what we consider fake good profile. The protocol reliability algorithms also look for unduly self-critical or negative response sets, that is, the fake bad profile. This scoring system will also check for random responses or response patterns that suggest item content has been misunderstood. Pages 3 to 5 of the Configural Report present some generic information explaining the unique type and level of self-realization model used in the CPI assessment, followed by an illustration of the type and level calculated for the respondent. This will be familiar and important contextual information to most CPI 260 users. You can see from Michelle, our sample, that her type or lifestyle came out to be supporter, or beta, at a level 7 of self-realization. This is similar to the client feedback report, where we also cover the information referred to as level of satisfaction. Page 8 of the Configural Report represents a slight departure from earlier CPI 260 reports, like the client feedback report. The Configural Report reverts to an earlier technique for presenting scale scores on the 20 main or folk scales on the CPI instrument. It provides a line plot which represents all scale results on a single page. Instead of a horizontal presentation for each scale, the Configural Report shows a vertical presentation of standard scores for your client. The graph on the upper part of the page shows gender-specific scores. That is, how your client scored on each CPI folk scale compared to 3,000 others of his or her gender. As you know from previous work with the CPI 260 instrument, the horizontal 50 line on the graph represents the average scores for each scale for the general population for the same gender as your client. The lower graph shows scores computed for total norms. That is, how your client scored compared to a combined sample of 3,000 males and 3,000 females. Note the similarity of the two graphs, with the notable exception of the final SN or sensitivity scale. So you can see from the upper female norms graph on page 8 of Michelle Sample's CPI 260 Configural Report that she has a dominance, or DO, score of 43, which is some 7 points lower than what we would expect for women in general on that scale. She also has a sociability, or an SY, score of 37, and some 13 points lower than most women in the general population. And that scale for her is lowest across the whole profile. You can also see that Michelle has numerous scores that are higher than women in general, including, for example, responsibility, abbreviated to RE, which at 54 is 4 points higher, as well as TO or tolerance, which at 63 is 13 points higher than most women. AI, which is achievement via independence, at 67 is the highest result across the whole profile, some 17 points higher. So what can these individual scale scores mean? Part 4 of the Configural report provides interpretive comments for each of the scale scores in the report. The important information presented in this part of the report shows a brief statement of purpose for each of the CPI 260 scales, as well as nuanced interpretive comments for each scale. This is an important departure from earlier CPI 260 reports, such as the Client Feedback Report. The Client Feedback Report provides basic descriptive anchors for each scale, indicating interpretive comments for just low scores and high scores on each scale. The Configural report, on the other hand, provides descriptive interpretations for the actual CPI 260 scale scores that are reported. This important change provides the interpreter with empirically based descriptions for those middle scores on the CPI 260 scales. No more guesswork or vague notions of what a series of middle scores might mean. The dominant score of 43 for Michelle is described as differential, unassuming, reserved. The sociability score of 37 is indicative of keeping people at a distance, inhibition, and being somewhat socially awkward. It is not surprising that she likely prefers to avoid conflict or emotionally charged situations. Michelle's slightly higher responsibility at 54 is some 4 points higher than women in general. This particular RE score, or responsibility score, suggests that others will find Michelle to be industrious, conscientious, and hardworking. Add this to her tolerance remarks of being clear-thinking, respectful, and fair-minded regarding others and their ideas. And remember that her AI score at 67 is Michelle's highest score, and it is suggested that others will describe her as an independent thinker, ingenious, and able to formulate plans. Part 5 of the Configural report presents the heart and soul of this new report, empirically based descriptive interpretations based on combination of CPI 260 scale results. The author of the CPI, Dr. Harrison Goff, identified 80 possible CPI 260 scale configurations or combinations that would yield meaningful descriptive results. The Configural report scoring system checks your client's results to see if any configurations are triggered, and it reports the results of this examination in Part 5 of the report. Actual descriptive data from large samples of males and females are used to identify the 5 adjectives most likely to be picked by knowledgeable observers to describe your client based on their CPI 260 combination of scales results. 5 adjectives least likely to be picked are also given. So let's look at the descriptions for women for configuration number 5, triggered by Michelle's particular dominance and independence scores. This particular configuration of CPI 260 scale results suggests that others may experience her as submissive, quiet, reserved, and modest. Others will likely not describe Michelle as assertive or outgoing. This confirms and is in keeping with some of the individual scale interpretive remarks that we have seen for Michelle. Configuration number 51 was also triggered for Michelle, having to do with her elevations on the CPI 260 tolerance, achievement via independence, and insightfulness scales. This combination of scores suggests descriptors for Michelle such as efficient, clear thinking, logical, and capable. Others will not experience her to be bitter or resentful. All in all, there were 7 different configurations triggered for Michelle. This number of configurations will vary from each client, of course, depending upon individual CPI 260 scale results. This research-based information provided by configural interpretation greatly adds to the nuanced descriptions that you can propose for your clients. It will also help to ensure that you did not somehow overlook possible descriptive information as you combed through the individual CPI 260 scale results. Part 6 of the Configural report presents an all-new addition to the interpretive and descriptive information for the CPI 260 assessment, an empirically based interpersonal Q-sort for your client's specific CPI 260 results. Harrison Goff developed the deck of 50 cards in the Q-sort, with each card containing a unique descriptive statement about interpersonal behaviors and style. Using the Q-sort simulates the research practice of having a group of knowledgeable and objective raters consider the standardized deck of 50 unique cards with your client in mind and sort the deck into 7 subdecks, ranging from very likely to be true for the subject to very unlikely to be true. As you can see from Category 7 of the Q-sort shown, it is very likely that knowledgeable and objective others who know Michelle would say that she is independent-minded, bright, and self-reliant. To go along with this, she is also well-organized, capable, and industrious. Interestingly, she's patient, though at times she can come on as slowly and may not show strong confidence in social settings, as suggested by card number 28. Category 6 for Michelle continues by characterizing her as conscientious and serious-minded, as well as being a good listener and able to draw people out. All important clues as to Michelle's approach and style. Note that the 50-card interpersonal Q-sort finishes off by indicating that it is very unlikely that others would experience Michelle as restless, undependable, or impolite. Added to the descriptive proposals assembled from going through the individual scales and scale combination in any given CPI 260 protocol, this interpersonal Q-sort will confirm and extend your understanding of your client's unique strengths and style, as well as ensure that you get as much descriptive information from your client's CPI 260 protocol as possible. So there it is, a summary of the CPI 260 Configural report. We trust that you can see the new higher level of interpretive insight that this report will bring to you, both the science as well as the art of the CPI interpretive process. We wish you all the best in your important work you do with your clients.